Hi there, this is a little video on breaking prohibition. So you've looked at prohibition, you've looked at the two sides of the argument and how it was introduced. This is on how it was actually broken, because it's one of these laws that as soon as it was introduced, people started to try to break it, okay? And it was one of these laws as well that was broken on an absolutely colossal scale. So we're going to try to look through here and see exactly how that went on, okay? So first of all, this photograph here is what we're going to start with, and you can see there's a cop here. The car's obviously had a crash, and probably the reason for this crash has been chased or it's been stopped, and inside they have found moonshine. Okay, this is like homemade brew that they're selling on the streets. This here is like very common in the United States. This producing of moonshine and trying to bootleg alcohol across the United States. As soon as you ban something, it makes it very lucrative, as you may know, and that's exactly what happened with alcohol, and that started to fund criminal gangs, and it started to make alcohol much more of a commodity than it was before. Okay, this one here is the people who have stopped this, and their job was enormous. It was almost an impossible job as well. So it's the Bureau of Prohibition, and you can see this here is an official stop, okay, to check people's cars. But these guys, there's no way they could actually stop this. There's only about 1,500 of them, and that was to patrol the whole United States. So their job was impossible to actually carry out. Some of them would have been open to bribes as well, as we'll see later on. Okay, and this here as well, well, this is just an ordinary American, but you can see something that would have went on across America. People tried to actually figure out how to get away with prohibition, how to get around prohibition, I should say. And this one here is this cane, and this cane has alcohol built into it, which they can sip at their will. This here sort of thing was going on across America, as I say, and there's lots of speakeasies would have actually started up, which would have been illegal bars, and there's actually more of those than there was before prohibition. Okay, so these are supporters of prohibition and opponents of prohibition. We're trying to put them into the right groups, okay? So if you have a look through, you've got the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, the Anti-Saloon League, the Canadian Brewers Association, the Citizens Committee, Anti-Dry League, Women's Christian Temperance Union, and American Medical Association. So if you think about where they would actually go in this chart, and this is how it works out. So the Ku Klux Klan, they tend to be quite Protestant based, so they disapprove of alcohol, and as well as that, they're anti-immigrant, and a lot of them try to actually cast aspersions at different groups that actually are coming into the United States, or already in the United States as well too. So Germans, for example, they produce a huge amount of alcohol. They're big brewing companies in the Midwest, so they're against the Germans, and they also suggest that the Irish people and various other groups have a drinking culture as well too, so they're obviously anti-immigrant, so they are supporters of prohibition. Anti-Saloon League, as it suggests, it's anti-bar, okay, Anti-Saloon League's trying to shut down the bars. Women's Christian Temperance Group, Temperance Union, this one here was a huge group from the 19th century, and it was hugely powerful in actually bringing down the big brewers and actually getting prohibition pushed through, so they're a major supporter of prohibition. And then there's the American Medical Association, so they would agree with prohibition on health grounds, obviously. Against them you'd have the Canadian Brewers Association, obviously imports to the United States, they would have would have been one of their biggest market probably. So they would have actually been opponents of prohibition. Citizens Committee would have been basically saying that this is against the rights of an American to actually take away the freedom to actually drink, as removing one of their freedoms, which should have been guaranteed under the Constitution. They also suggest that all the tax that was gained from brewing is now all lost as well too, which is a big loss to the US government. Then there's the Anti-Dry League, as it suggests, it's against prohibition as well too. Alright, so these are your keywords, okay? The first one's bootlegging. Bootlegging means to make or sell or transport alcohol illegally, okay? So bootlegging went on across the United States. Moonshine is what was produced, and this was produced across America again. It was produced using things like potatoes, and it's very apparent in the Appalachian region. That's like a mountainous region that runs across the eastern spine of America, and it involves Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and it's they're quite a mountainous area. This Appalachian region as well too, where this existed. There was lots of homebrewed alcohol. They would hide them in mines and forests of the mountains, and it's estimated that 430,000 gallons of it were actually confiscated in New York in 1927 alone. Okay, so this task here, some of you may have done this, but you have to make sure you do this. Okay, there's a case study using this video here in Prohibition, and it's about Roy Olmsted. So I want you to look at this here, watch it very carefully, and make the mind map. Fill in the mind map in your worksheets. Okay, about Roy Olmsted, because it's a really good case study about how one person could get involved in the Prohibition trade as well too. Okay, so make sure that's done and done well. Okay, then we're looking at why did Prohibition fail. You've got this big mind map in your booklets as well too, and we're going to try to fill this in. This will be filled in over a couple of lessons here. Okay, so so looking back here, why did it fail? Well, these are the guys that have to enforce Prohibition. Okay, it's the Bureau of Prohibition, as it suggests here, and they're a federal law enforcement agency, so it's across the United States, and their job is to enforce Prohibition laws. Members of the unit are actually known as Prohibition agents. Okay, and they would seek out bootlegging stills. They would try to smash them, try to destroy them. They would try to intercept arrivals from the sea and raid some of the 250,000 speakeasies, but again there's only 1,500 of these about, and like that job is immense, to try to break down the stills across America, to try to intercept arrivals from the sea, and from Canada as well too, and from Mexico. That's almost impossible on its own. And then 250,000 speakeasies, trying to find those, trying to destroy those, it's impossible to do. So try to think about these challenges that Prohibition agents would have faced. This is just enormous to try to undertake this without the federal funds and without the manpower as well too. There's a little video here I want you to watch as well too based on this. Okay, alright, this film here is fantastic. Okay, so it's called The Untouchables, and it's about a group of federal Prohibition agents who were determined to bring down some of the big gangsters involved in breaking Prohibition. So it's quite a film to watch. Okay, so okay, but the problems here are this: there's simply not enough agents to deal with the wide-scale breaking of the laws going on across America. There's no way these small group of agents could stop it. The bootleggers often had more money than the agents, and therefore faster cars, faster boats, such as the real McCoy, which we'll look about later on. The American borders were huge on land, so it's about 4,000 miles, Canada, Mexico, and at sea, the West Indies and Asia as well. Impossible to police. They were poorly paid and therefore easy to bribe as well too. And even these untouchables here had at least one of their members who was regarded as being corrupt. The law across America, why they disrespect this, really worried some people that the law itself was being abused by so many people who didn't regard Prohibition as a lawful act. Okay, so Americans found lots of ways to break Prohibition. There were more speakeasies, it's illegal bars, about 250,000, so it's more bars than before Prohibition. Many in the police were corrupt. They took bribes from the people they're trying to get alcohol off. So if they did catch an illegal still, they would take bribes or take alcohol sometimes in payment of not prosecuting. California vineyards, they actually dried their wine into blocks. Very ingenious way of doing this. So they dried their wine into blocks and then sold it in vast quantities. What they would do is send it out by mail order. It arrive at a customer's house, and there'd be a message on it not to add water to this here, because if you did, it would become alcohol. So it's a warning, but obviously that's what people were going to do. And there were so many people breaking the law that it was almost unenforceable, and made it the laughing stock as well too. And you have to try to think here, why were so many people willing to break the law? That's obviously a huge amount of people are against Prohibition and don't think it's actually going to work. Okay, so these are the things you have to look out for in challenging Prohibition. So this is like a very typical essay. Okay, so loopholes. So these are the actual blocks of grapes here, blocks of wine that was sold. Okay, and these are the instructions. So there's ways around it. There's lots of loopholes around it. For example, you also had an allowance to keep the alcohol that you already had, and there was a big run up to Prohibition starting, so many wealthy people just stockpiled their cellars full of wine. And one thing about it was you're not actually forbidden to consume the wine, you're just forbidden to produce it and to transport it. So lots of people could actually say, well, I'm allowed to consume my own wine. That's exactly what happened. Then you have sacramental wine. This is wine for religious ceremonies, and there was an exemption for that. Well, that there boomed in popularity. People were simply buying lots and lots more sacramental wine during this time as well too. The same for medical prescriptions. There was an exemption for that, and over 6 million prescriptions were actually produced during this time. That's for 1 pint of alcohol. So yeah, that boomed as well too. In parts of New York, there was these cordial bars. Cordial is like lemonade. Inside the bottles, though, there was actually alcohol. It wasn't lemonade at all. It was alcohol. So it was disguised. There's even milkmen who would pretend to be milkmen and deliver alcohol in what looked to be milk bottles every morning. Moonshine, obviously made in vast quantities. This here is unregulated because of the way it's produced, which means that nobody really knew what was in it and how dangerous it was, and because of that there was a huge spike in people getting poisoned by illegal alcohol, by moonshine. So it did have big effects that way. And speakeasies themselves, there was over 250,000 of them, so there's more bars than before Prohibition, which is highly ironic as well too. And most of these were protected by criminal gangs. They were hidden in places like barbers and behind in some stores as well too. These would all be hidden as well too, but it's an open secret. So bootlegging, you can see here the issue. Okay, Canada's up here, Mexico's down here, the Bahamas and West Indies over here. You have huge amounts of opportunity to smuggle in rum and whiskey and all the rest of it from around these borders. There's no way that those agents could actually defend this whole coastline and this border as well too. So it's vast. Okay, so bootlegging, smuggling alcohol became vastly big business along these borders. And you would have one guy called the Real McCoy. He owned a ship with a friend, and they would actually travel back and forwards between the Bahamas and Florida, and they would get $15,000 a crossing, bringing in Scotch. And it's called the Real McCoy. This word, the Real McCoy, this phrase, the Real McCoy, comes from this person because his Scotch was guaranteed. You knew it was going to be the real stuff. It wasn't going to be watered down. It was meant to be the best. Okay, so that's the word or the phrase the Real McCoy comes from. Okay, this is the police then. Okay, so what can we say about them? Why did Prohibition fail? One of the reasons it failed was because these guys here were woefully under-resourced. Okay, their cars, their boats couldn't catch the boats that the bootleggers were using. The bootleggers would actually soup up their cars. They would adapt their cars to outrun the police very easily, and this would lead to the sport of stock car racing later on because of this. There was also two low numbers, 1,500 to cover the whole United States. It's one agent for every 70,000 people at the time. There's no way they could actually undertake this task. They were under-resourced, poorly paid. That means that they were actually open for bribes, open for corruption as well too. Every time a raid would happen on a speakeasy, they could just be bought off by people giving them either alcohol or by paying them in money, and that there made up a lot of their paychecks. So it's corruption went on a vast scale, and then corruption didn't stop there. It actually went all the way to the very top. So the people at the very top, they weren't living as they were preaching, because President Harding was well known to have 2 weekly poker meetings a week. Okay, that's two weekly poker meetings, and it was known that they were getting well supplied of bootleg whiskey. There was meant to be a cellar in the White House that had full of alcohol as well too. So lots of contradictions and hypocrisy as well too. He also handed out positions to his best mates, his friends, who were found to be highly corrupt. This was known as the Ohio Gang, and vast sums of money could be made in places like the Department of Justice because they took bribes from the bootleggers, and this made many of these politicians or many of these civil servants highly wealthy. This was actually found out as well too, and this made people openly question Prohibition themselves. People at the top are abusing the power, well, so could they. Okay, and then you have the darker effects of this too, because once you ban something, it makes it highly lucrative. That's exactly what happens in the United States. Organized crime, there's a huge crime wave. Crime networks soon realized they can make billions of dollars through smuggling, production, corruption and racketeering, The supply was often controlled by these crime networks, making them enormously wealthy, and these became famous across the world. Criminal underworld and the lives of the very rich and politics also became intertwined, because these people became so wealthy they would actually have the politicians in their pocket. They would keep them bribed, which led to huge amounts of political corruption. And these guys here are very, very famous at the time, especially Al Capone here. He would have controlled the Chicago underworld, and would have been very famous. He's called Scarface, and he would have actually killed people himself with baseball bat. So highly dodgy character. So what does this word racketeering mean? Well, a protection racket is basically saying that, look, you're going to protect, like say a speakeasy, or protect a business through the threat of violence. This goes on in Belfast as well too, some paramilitary groups, but it went on across the United States with these big gangsters as well too. So one of the most negative effects of this was obviously organised crime. These crime gangs would have fought what's called turf wars. So they had big gangsters for every city. So Chicago, it would have been obviously Al Capone, but you would have had other ones in New York and Philadelphia. Criminals became famous. Lucky Luciano, Al Capone in Chicago, he controlled a huge amount of trade. It's estimated that at one stage he was making over $1,500 every minute in 1928. So that's a huge amount of money to be making, and highly influential as well. You can see why he could bribe politicians. He was called Scarface, and he had gangs of what's called torpedoes, or murder squads, that were sent out to intimidate and kill. The most famous incident was this Valentine's Day massacre, which took place in 1928 in Chicago. And this is quite a hard picture of this here, where these 7 members were lined up against the wall by what was meant to be the police. It was actually gangsters in disguise. It was these torpedoes, and they would have actually massacred these 7 people in cold blood in this warehouse. So corruption ran so high that almost half of the Chicago police were estimated to be on the take. On the take means they were taking bribes, which means that Al Capone was allowed to get away with so many things. So you can see the effect it's having in the United States. So for this here, I want you to look at this video here on this Valentine's Day massacre. Okay, it'll explain exactly what went on as well too, and you can add that there to your table. Okay, so have a look at that and see exactly what was involved. These are a couple of small videos, okay, that I want you to watch. There's 1, 2 and 3. Again, if you watch these here, okay, and complete your notes on the note sheet on Prohibition, organised crime as well too. These are really good videos, and they'll have lots of details that you can add to your task as well too. Okay, so this is like a typical question as well. So describe 2 ways in which the law on Prohibition was broken in the United States. So you can identify one, and give explanation and example as well too. Do that twice, and you will be flying. Okay, and you can see here a wanted poster for Al Capone. Again, if you're looking at a source exercise, we'll go through what does the content say about Al Capone. How useful is that to you? What's the author like of this here source? Is that useful to you as well too? Is the date important? And according to your own knowledge, is this right? And are there any omissions left in this here as well too? Okay, so hopefully this rounds up this little topic. Hopefully it's useful. It tends to come up quite a lot on the exam, and I would recommend you know it very, very well. Thank you.